Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 33.
Episode 33. Ben, I'm going to tell you, it's felt like a year since we last talked. So listeners, we last recorded on October 30th, 2020, and we are now recording on November 14th. It's only been 2 weeks, but boy, has it been.
Yeah, since that time, there's been Halloween and the 2020 presidential election and a hurricane and a whole bunch of other stuff.
There's so many things happened. And in light of the giant presidential election that you noticed, or that you mentioned, I'm not going to go into detail about that. Like, we don't have to take sides on politics on this podcast. But I want to bring up facts about our 33rd president, since this is episode 33, and that's going to be
Great.
my bad at numbers today. So, do you know who the 33rd president of the United States was, Ben?
Only because I have the notes in front of me, but if you'd asked me, I would not have known.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows who the president, like 2 presidents ago, was. It was some guy with like a tree last name. I don't remember. Anyway, the 33rd president of the United States was Harry S. Truman. And he served as president from 1945 to 1953. And I have three interesting facts about him that I
All
didn't
right.
know. Everybody knows he's the guy that dropped the bombs. Talked
Wait,
about the Berlin airlift and all the post-World War II stuff. We're not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about some three obscure facts that I found very interesting about Harry Truman.
this is already blowing my mind because the president served 4-year terms. Why did he serve from 45 to 53?
Oh,
What threw the years off?
he was the vice president when the president at the time died, and he
Oh,
became president right at the end of
okay.
World War II. Come on, everybody! Come on, Ben. Everybody knows
Okay.
that.
But then why did it end in an odd year too?
That I can't tell you. Leap
All right.
years? Who knows? It's these obscure facts are lost to time. Okay, so Harry Truman was one of only a handful of presidents that actually had no college or postgraduate degree of any kind. He tried going to business school, but he dropped out, and then he went to law school for a little bit, but he dropped out of that.
The
Uh,
only one.
Not no, he's a handful. There's a handful that didn't have any post-secondary education. But I found interesting is he actually tried to go to West Point because it was free, and he grew up on a farm in the Midwest. So like his family had no money, so he
So
tried to go
he was like you. He wanted to go to a military academy.
because it was free. Yes, exactly. And they wouldn't let him in because of his poor eyesight. He
Huh.
had 20/50 vision in one eye and 2400 vision in the left eye,
Holy
which
crap.
that makes him legally blind in one eye. What's funny is he served in the army during World War One, and the way
How? They wouldn't let somebody with that bad eyesight in the army.
he memorized the eye chart.
Oh, the classic.
The classic,
Classic move.
because apparently there's only one.
And you can't have somebody in the Oval Office unless they lied to get there somehow.
Rife with political angst. We're moving on from that.
All right.
Another thing that I found very interesting was his first real job was as a timekeeper for a railroad company, which I don't know what a timekeeper for a railroad does, but it mentions specifically that he commonly had to sleep in hobo towns on the side of the railroad tracks in different locations.
That's a thing.
That's a thing. And he picked up so many swear words that it made him a better military officer. But that's a story I'm not going to tell. Like, there's a whole thing about how his troops like obeyed him in some big crisis because he was swearing at them so fiercely.
Okay, my favorite biographer won a Pulitzer Prize for his book about Harry Truman, and now I'm going to read it because I hadn't yet. His name's David McCullough, and yeah, he won a prize for his book about Harry Truman. So now I'm going to read it. I got it.
Well, you're the kind of person that would read a book about Harry Truman. I read half of a Wikipedia article about him. I'm like, that's enough interesting facts. And
All
so
right.
that's it. I'm out of Harry Truman facts.
Number 33, done and dusted.
Harry Truman, you served our country well. Thank you, sir.
All right, so there's a loose end I got to tie up from last time.
Okay.
So last time you went off on a whinge. I'll have to add that to our bad at English list. You went off on a whinge about the potential for things that you own digital property rights for being tenuous because the company that owns it goes out of business or sells to another company or that kind of thing. And and we had a long discussion that I think was a good discussion where we're kind of representing different points of view about how digital property rights should be managed when individuals purchase a right to use some kind of intellectual property.
Yes.
And you were telling it from the point of view of, you told the story about how Google Play was closing and you felt like you all this investment that you'd made in content provided to you by Google Play was tenuous. And then in a completely separate part of the discussion, we also talked about how the natural state of any business and capitalism is monopoly. And what I thought in the back of my mind, but I didn't mention during that discussion, is the fact that Google Play was not closing, it was being eaten by its parent company.
Yes. So that feeds even better into the discussion we're talking about.
Yes. So you were wrong, but you were right. You were more right.
I was technically correct. The best kind of correct.
Right. So, YouTube came out in 2005. Within a year, Google, being a much bigger company, recognized that it was going to be a big thing and bought it. And then in 6 years since then, they've kind of diversified the YouTube brand. Google Play started in 2012, selling, being probably intended to be a direct competitor to like the iTunes Music Store. But at one point, YouTube just became so big that it was a more recognizable brand for selling people digital content. So they've stood up the YouTube Music service. And Google recognized that they had these two brands internal to their own company, Google Play Store and YouTube Music, that were both basically doing the same thing. But YouTube Music, they wanted to just stop competing with themselves. So they closed down Google Play and transferred everything to YouTube Music.
Okay, is that supposed to make me feel better? Because now that just introduces so much more like unbalance and like all this corporate political nonsense into my life as a consumer of digital goods.
Well, I got to ask you a question. How manumatic was the process on your part to transfer your rights from the Google Play Store to YouTube Music?
I will not lie. Google made it very easy to transfer my music to YouTube Music. However, what they did not do, they did not make it easy for me to download files, like the actual MP3s of the music that I owned. Like I had to dig through a couple of different help articles. I had to go through some obscure
Right. They want you to
tutorials.
stream it.
They wanted me to go into YouTube. Of course, they're incentivized.
Right.
They want me to be a part of that ecosystem so they can start
Yes.
charging me money for all the stuff over there.
They can charge whoever's letting them send out the music per stream.
I feel like I did finally eventually download the files, but the whole process, it felt like Google was giving those files to me begrudgingly. It's like
It's begrudging now, and I think at some point it will not even be possible.
Which is that's the whole reason I got on a whinge about this whole process. Like
I get it.
I'm looking at it from the point of I'm a consumer. I have paid, like I have upheld my end of this transaction. I have given you money. You are supposed to give me this thing, and you're very much on the side of you just want to throw your money into the void and then just take whatever scraps from the table come back to you.
They're saying we want to give you access to this in the way we want to give it to you. Now, as we're still in this kind of foggy middle period before the internet is truly and completely ubiquitous, I'm talking like 5G, Wi-Fi everywhere kind of ubiquitousness.
Satellite internet to everybody all the time forever.
Streaming won't even be a question. It'll just be the norm.
Yes, which again, like we were talking about, when even a couple of years ago, I am all for streaming being the norm, but I'm starting to see these monetization models for the streaming setups that are making me question that. Like the idea of I don't actually own anything. I'm just paying for limited access to stuff.
And we've kind of gone full circle. I mean, you could. Back in the 80s, when you wanted to hear your favorite song, you just turned on the radio and listened until it came on. At least now you can have some input.
Yes, if I pay $6 a month for this service. Or
life.
$6 a month forever. Or, from my perspective, what I thought, I could pay $2 to have that song at my fingertips whenever I wanted forever. But then Google Play getting eaten by YouTube threw that up in the air for me for a couple of days, and that just freaked me out.
Okay, so back in the radio economy, the cost was having to listen to ads. Or you had like a cassette player, and when your favorite song came on, you hurried up and tried to record it, and you missed the first few seconds, and the DJ talked over the last 5 seconds, and you sort of had like a grainy, poor recording of your favorite song. Or you went down to the CD store. We'll skip ahead of cassettes to CDs. You go down to the CD store and you pay $16 for it, which is roughly like you were saying, $2 a song. So if there's 8 songs on an album and you paid $2 each, it's still the same. You're still like roughly paying the same cost to have exclusive access to the entire album as you were back when you had to go and buy a CD. or I pay $6 a month and have access to everything unlimited. It feels better.
But do you? Because I remember when I paid for Hulu at one point, and they had like a $6 a month subscription or whatever, and then all of a sudden ads started popping up, like one ad at the beginning that was a minute long. I'm like, wait, what is this? Like, oh, well, there's another tier that is now $2 more a month, and then we get rid of all the ads. Or how about YouTube? We had one 5-second ad at the beginning of a video, maybe, that you could skip and then watch your video. And now we have at least 2 ads. Sometimes they're unskippable for 15 seconds, and we've got mid-video ads. And one thing that's nagging me, Google, if you're listening, I'm on to you. Your little button says you may skip this in 5 seconds, but it's not 5 seconds. It's like 5.999 seconds. You know what I'm talking about. People listening that watch YouTube know what I'm talking about. That 5-second ad, that's not 5 seconds. That's like 6 full seconds.
Well, the thing that you talk about as being so disconcerting to you, I find very comforting, because I think the one irreconcilable fact about capitalism is that people respond to incentives, like we've been saying. And if a company is trying to make money, they're going to keep trying to find ways to make money. Back in the 90s, I got my first email address. Well, not my first, it was probably like my third. But I was tired of like having at prodigy.net or at AOL.com or whatever that just felt as temporary as the services they were coming through. And I got hotmail.com. And that address, I just wanted to stop moving around. I was satisfied with the prefix, I was satisfied with the suffix, and I just wanted to have it. And then in 1997, Microsoft bought this successful online free email service, Hotmail. And I thought, that was so comforting that this giant corporation, very motivated in making money, now owns my service that I was getting before. And even if they want me to pay a fee, okay, it just feels secure now.
Have you not watched any Black Mirror episodes? Like there is, I understand where you're coming from. It's like we are standing at the same point in time and we are looking into the future, and you are looking down this sunny, rosy, well-tended path where everything works out great for everybody. And I'm looking down the other path with the menacing dead trees overhanging and the bats and the glowing red eyes and like the holes of them and stuff. And like these are 2 equally possible futures where it's either this cyberpunk dystopian nightmare that I'm afraid of, or this glorious Star Trek-like utopia that you keep talking about.
So did you see that movie with Tim Robbins that came out back in 2001 called Antitrust? He was kind of this like pseudo Bill Gates figure, and he was courting this young hotshot computer programmer to come work for the Microsoft-ish company that existed in this film.
I don't think I did, no.
Yeah, it's a classic. Anyway, at one point the kid realizes that the company is trying to get him to basically engineer software that will infect people's computers so that they'll want to buy the big company's software or something like that. I might be mixing it up with a different movie, but yeah, I get all that they want to make money and they'll do the easiest way, blah 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 blah. I still feel like we're just best off in our economy if we trust the market forces to do the right thing.
It's and you just blah 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 all the negative stuff away.
Yeah,
and it's
but so do you. You say, oh well, those big companies are just going to become monopolies and exploit us unless we control them. Okay, who controls them? Who? Politicians? Oh yeah, they're not corrupt. They don't have agendas. They don't do self-interested things that don't make any sense.
No, I'm 100% on what you're agreeing with what you're saying. Like until we get to the post-currency, like everybody just has everything that they need forever, utopia that is the Star Trek universe, we're going to be stuck slogging it out down here in the mud. And everybody's just trying to figure out the best way. It's like capitalism is the absolute worst form of economics in the world, except for all the other ones. Like it's the same kind of thing.
All right. Well, then let's get away from the touchy issue of digital rights management and talk about something much safer.
That's an excellent point. Like I could talk about that forever.
Global climate change.
Oh, this will be a much easier topic.
So last time we kind of gone over the time limit for our show and we kind of run out of time, but we had not gotten to like the last chapter of Super Freakonomics, which was the one about climate change and geoengineering. And I felt like there was still some material there we should probably talk about.
So that chapter discussed specifically, they went and interviewed a bunch of like high-level scientists or big brain, 20-pound brain type engineers and researchers and things that are all part of this company that some people claim is just a patent mill where they come up with these ideas, they patent it, and then they go out and they look for people using those same ideas and then sue the crap out of them. Which
Really?
is, yeah, that's...
I don't remember them saying that in the book. Is this some independent research you did?
No, they mentioned it, and I just happen to know stuff about patent mills.
Oh, okay.
Like, their opponents of this company claim that they're nothing but a patent mill. And the company internal and their leadership and the people that are in the company say, no, we're actually engineering solutions for big problems and things. Like they're not so much in the practical application of anything.
That's a good alternate perspective on what we heard.
So it depends on your perspective, if you're internal or external. These guys they admit they don't make anything. Like they haven't produced a lot of their ideas. Yes, they churn out ideas and then they license and sell it or whatever. But one of the things that they were tackling was this idea of global climate change. And this chapter made me actually very hopeful and very worried at the same time about global climate change.
Yeah, so the Freakonomics way of thinking is just somebody taking a different perspective on what's happening in the world, maybe doing something a bit unconventional, maybe trying to find some data on something that people previously didn't look at data. Like, for instance, are child safety seats more effective than regular adult seat belts for preserving the life of a child in a car crash? They actually found that there's not a lot of data on that question. Right,
and the idea that they were talking about specifically with global climate change is, one, there's not a ton of data, and two, everything that we are being told at this point is that the only solution is to go to a carbon neutral, if not carbon deficit society.
Well, they also spent a good amount of time talking about the fact that the politics and public thought about the idea of climate change has very much become dogmatic in its approach. And so the science gets waved as like a defense, but the people behind it have political reasoning and things. Like, for instance, the focus on carbon. Carbon isn't necessarily the most potent greenhouse gas, nor is it the best place to look if we're trying to stop global climate change, which at this point no one really disputes whether or not that's happening. But it's not all of the idea of a carbon economy and measuring and carbon credits and all those kinds of things just turn into government programs for controlling people and giving money to your buddies.
Said the guy who's all for capitalism. Anyway, but we're moving on from that. Yes, and so like you're talking about, the chapter of the Super Economic books was looking for cheaper alternatives, cheaper, clever solutions to problems that currently exist. And one of the things that they talked about in this book was geoengineering, which I had not heard of until I listened to that book. And then like a week later, a Kurzgesagt video talked about geoengineering, which was quite timely. We'll have that link in the show notes.
No doubt in my mind the Kurzgesagt guys read Super Freakonomics before making that video.
So the idea is that there was a volcano. Was it Mount Pinatubo?
Mount Pinatubo.
Yeah, so a volcano erupted, like it was a supermassive eruption, and shot a ton of volcanic gases into the upper atmosphere. And since it happened recently enough in history, there is a ton of scientific data that was collected on the myriad of effects that something on that scale has on the planet.
Yeah, Mount Pinatubo was 1991.
Yeah, wow. So I was alive. Like, I didn't hear anything about that volcano.
It was in the Philippines.
So outside of the U.S., who cares?
Right, but what it did do is it erupted and spewed a giant cloud of sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere.
Which acted as like sunscreen for a while.
Yeah, it actually had a measurable cooling effect on the world climate.
And so then the premise of this company of engineers being, well, why don't we just do that? We come up with a couple of fairly, looking at a nation's economy scale, very cost-effective ways of pumping sulfur dioxide or some other greenhouse gas of your choice into the upper atmosphere, and just doubling down on, well, let's just keep messing with the atmosphere to keep things the way they are, or to just buy us the time we need to make impactful changes to how we run our lives.
I think you handled that a bit too lightly. I want to be specific about it, because yes, that was one of the potential unintended consequences they talked about. If we were to do something like this, that's basically polluting the atmosphere to counteract all the polluting we're doing to the atmosphere, it could just give people a false sense of security and have them double down on bad behaviors that led to the problem in the first place and not actually solve it.
Yes.
Kind of like, I don't know, do anti-lock brakes make people wait longer, drive more recklessly? Because I'd actually heard that there was evidence that anti-lock brakes cause people to get in more accidents.
Probably said a Chevy, research report that they put out when Ford had anti-lock brakes and Chevy didn't.
Right. Yeah. Okay. But they were talking about the fact that, all of these political solutions that people are proposing, like wind farms, don't even have an appreciable difference on the overall equation. Like they don't really reduce carbon emissions that much. They don't produce that much energy, and they actually consume quite a bit, and they're very spotty, and they have a lot of drawbacks. So if we're going to be good scientists, what are we going to do that's actually going to impact the problem? And so they're looking at, cost effectiveness, and something like what they called Budyko's Blanket, which was just deliberately polluting sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere at a rate that's actually achievable with today's technology, would actually have an effect. If there's all these alarmist climate scientists out there saying the world is going to come to an end, what do? These guys are raising their hand and say, I got an idea.
Right. And unfortunately, because it's such a counterintuitive solution, to fix pollution, we just need to pollute more in a specific way, that everybody, the knee-jerk reaction and immediately the logic is that can't possibly be right. And two, why would you want to destroy the planet even more than it already is?
Yeah. They called it blasphemy in the church of the climates. Yeah.
The other point, I was less about that because, like you said, situations get dire enough, people will grab at straws, and we'll get to the point where that's Budyko's Blanket sounds like a great solution. My concern when they touched on it that I thought was very interesting is that Budyko's Blanket can be, since it is so cost effective and fairly easy to do, one nation could just take responsibility for the whole thing.
One nation has their hand on the world's thermostat.
Yeah, and that becomes a terrifying concept. We're talking Cobra Commander with the Weather Dominator now. That's what we're talking about.
I'm making that graphic. That's going to be awesome.
But you know what I'm talking about. It's here we are, the U.S. debating in Congress about whether or not Budyko's Blanket is an achievable thing. Meanwhile, name any third world actor has just implemented it and is just cranking it down and it's oh, I'm sorry, did you not want to freeze this winter? Then you need to pay your heating bill.
Okay, so I saw a YouTube video this week where that exact thing is happening in Africa right now. So the Nile River is 98% of the population and economy of the nation of Egypt, and a good portion of the one just below it. I'm sorry for my geography, I can't remember what it is. And for most of its length, it travels through those two countries. And they have a pact that they won't do certain things, and they have agreements over it and stuff. But actually, 65% of the water comes from this tiny little estuary, basically, of the Nile River that goes into Ethiopia, which is in none of these agreements about it. And the Ethiopians are in the final steps of building what they're calling the Grand something reservoir dam or something like that. Anyway, they're building this giant reservoir in Ethiopia that will provide tons of hydroelectric power and jobs and fuel the economy of Ethiopia. And the Egyptians are beside themselves because now upstream, the Ethiopians have the power to basically shut off their water supply if they want to. They have their hand on the thermostat. And this thing's 2 years from being complete. And then they have to fill it up. And they're already fighting about how fast to fill up the reservoir because it will impact the Egyptians.
Yes, funny thing, when you need to fill up a body of water, you have to stop the amount of water that's flowing through it.
Right. Eventually, it'll reach a sustenance point, and then the dam will be, the reservoir will be full, and they'll be able to maintain pre-reservoir levels of water flow, and even maybe prevent floods that might have happened before, and those kinds of things. It'll be good. But the Egyptians are just beside themselves because it's a threat to their national security. The Ethiopians have their hand on the thermostat, and the Egyptians don't have a say. I wouldn't be surprised if tensions raised too high. There isn't some secret, Egyptian, sortie in the middle of the night, and the thing gets blown up.
So I have two quick comments about that whole story. One being, I can't see any tensions escalating over this because that part of the world has always been known for its stability and calm, rational, diplomatic discussions between its neighbors.
Right.
And number two, all of Ben's British friends that are listening to this podcast that immediately shouted out the name of the country south of Egypt, the only reason you know it is because you guys used to own it. So get off your high horse.
All right. That is all I had to say about that. How about you?
No, I'm all for geoengineering, with the exception of, Cobra Commander destroying the planet with his thermostat. But if science can fix these problems in ways that, because the cheapest solution and the one that impacts people's day-to-day lives the least, that's the solution that eventually is going to get enacted. We all know
it. Okay. It is time for Bad at English.
Everybody's favorite time.
I want to start off by asking you a question. What is the intent when someone says that's like apples and oranges? What are they trying to say?
I've said that to you multiple times on this podcast.
What does it mean when you say it?
It's because you are always, like straight up, it's always you are trying to use an analogy comparing one thing to another, but they are dissimilar in such fundamental ways that they don't equate. So apples and oranges are like, they're close enough that you could hold them up and be like, these are the same, but they're different enough that they can be distinct. That's what it is in my mind.
Okay, that's a very good description, and I think that was not what my understanding of it was. I thought that just meant these two things are different. And I was thinking about it, and apple and orange really are kind of the same. They're about the same size. They're both edible. They both grow on trees. At some point, they're kind of similar colors, depending on the variety or whatever. They have seeds inside. They start from flowers. All those things are very similar, but they're really not comparable. In fact, I think that was part of the intent of the graphic designer that did the art on the cover of Freakonomics and Super Freakonomics, because it's an apple on the outside and an orange in the middle.
Which would be really scary to bite into.
Yeah. Well, the British do not use that phrase. They have a different phrase they use. They say, that's like chalk and cheese.
That's undeniably more fun to say. Chalk and cheese.
It is. Chalk and cheese. And I looked at, and first of all, anyone that has an idea that cheddar cheese is yellow is so wrong, because if you go to Cheddar, England, which is where cheddar cheese is from, it's not yellow at all, it's white. All cheese in Europe is white, all cheese.
Okay, get off your cheese horse, Ben.
All right.
I was just yelling at British listeners for this kind of thing. Just tone it down.
Oh, dang, I did it. So, but chalk and cheese, since they're both white, could look very, very similar. But obviously, if you tried to eat one for sustenance, it's a mineral that came from the ground, and the other is organic that came from an animal and was refined down. And they look the same, but they're very, very different. And I think that one's a bit more apt than apples and oranges, chalk and cheese.
I disagree. I disagree entirely because,
all right,
like I said at the beginning of this, my understanding of apples and oranges is that these two things are similar enough to be compared, but different enough that they don't equate.
I'll read you the Wiktionary definition of chalk and cheese. Set of things that are superficially alike but very different in substance.
But this resides on the understanding and the assumption that all cheeses are white. And yes, we just heard your very posh cheese rant, but cheddar cheese in America, sir, is bright orange. Like, I have a giant bag of grated sharp cheddar.
We add coloring to it. It's an abomination.
Oh, it's...
And if we want to have cheese be regular color, we have to call it white cheddar, which the British just call cheddar. Just like what we call Swiss cheese, they just call cheese.
Well, then how do you differentiate Swiss cheese from any other cheese?
They have a name for it. They call it Emmental.
So, all of our European listeners, I don't care. Like, call your cheese whatever you want. It's wrong.
Oh, you're reinforcing the I don't care American.
Ben, we don't know which country is south of Egypt. We are both this person. You're going to look it up.
But we can find out.
But we don't care enough to. Either one of us at any point in this conversation could have looked that up in a matter of seconds, and we have not taken the time to do it.
Oh my gosh, I'm totally looking it up. It's Sudan.
Never in a million years would I've guessed that.
Yeah. All right. Well,
apologies to all of our Sudanese listeners.
Now that we've talked about global climate change, politics, geoengineering, and language and international sensitivities to cultural ideas. Let's get out of let's go into a completely different discipline and talk philosophy.
This is hands down going to go into the history books as the most high thought, abstract episode of Bad at Magic ever.
All right, so this is what we're going to talk about now is what is commonly called the trolley problem. The term the trolley problem is old. There was a philosopher named Philip Foot back in 1967 that brought up this thought exercise that was just kind of this simple practical problem that's really implausible, but sets up a lot of variables in order to isolate the morality of the situation. Later philosopher named by the name of Judith Jarvis Thomson reintroduced the problem and kind of elaborated on a bit and wrote a paper where she named it the trolley problem in 1976. And that's where it started to gain popularity. And again, it's gotten new popularity, on the internet, lots of videos about it on YouTube, and most recently on the NBC television series, The Good Place, which is all about philosophy and learning about what's right and wrong.
I like The Good Place.
Yeah. So they kind of explored this very well, actually, in The Good Place in a couple of things. One where they're sitting in a classroom talking about the philosophies behind the trolley problem, and then they use magic and go to a real-life application and actually act it out to great hilarity. But at its heart, it's very serious. So here are the trappings of the trolley problem. You, for some reason that doesn't need to be explained, have in your hand a switch that can change the path of a runaway trolley. This runaway trolley is headed towards 5 people. If you throw the switch, you will divert the trolley and it instead will kill a different single person. So the question is, do you take the switch and use it to change the path of the trolley to kill the one person instead of allowing it to continue on his path and kill 5 people?
With the question being, or the assumed question being, like, do you, like, if you throw the switch, like, you're supposedly taking agency, and now the killing of the one person becomes your direct fault.
Yes, I think that's exactly what Philippa Foot was trying to get to with this problem. She was trying to distinguish between utilitarian philosophical theory and deontological philosophical theory. Utilitarian is that you want to maximize utility, that the consequences of an action are the only measurement of right and wrong, as in whatever the outcome is, that shows whether it was right or wrong to begin with. Whereas a deontological theory is the action itself right or wrong. So, if I'm choosing between losing 1 life or losing 5 lives, of course, the least amount of life loss is objectively the best thing according to utilitarian theory. But in deontological theory, if I don't touch the lever at all, then I personally have not intervened in a system to cause loss of life.
You have not assumed any of the responsibility for the outcomes.
Right.
So, then that begs the question, Ben, would you throw the lever? Well, that's a heavy sigh. These lead up to really good explanations.
Well, Philippa Foot, I think, even as hard as she tried to come up with this outlandish, implausible situation, which actually happened once in real life, I found out. Outlandish, implausible situation still didn't get to the heart of it. So one of the things Judith Jarvis Thomson added to the situation was another example that has the same math but feels more personal and really cuts to the heart of it. Let's say instead of having a lever in your hand, you're standing on a bridge over the trolley tracks next to a really, really fat man. And it's assured that if he were to fall onto the tracks ahead of the trolley, it would stop or divert the trolley sufficiently that the 5 people would not lose their life.
So you could stop the trolley, presumably by killing this super fat guy.
Yes. So now you push him off the bridge onto the tracks. It stops the trolley and saves 5 lives. Now it's the same math from a utilitarian point of view.
Assuming that any person in their sane mind would see this runaway trolley, evaluate what's going to happen, and then immediately start looking around for the fattest guy they could to try to stop a runaway trolley.
Yeah, but the point, again, is to try to separate deontological theory from utilitarian theory.
Taking direct action, yeah.
Okay, you say that you would throw a lever to kill one person instead of five. Would you push a guy off a bridge to kill one person instead of five?
I see. This is the whole, we've already established what you are. We're just negotiating price now.
That's it. That's it. So, I like to think of myself as deontological, like I believe that there is an objective right or wrong, but I also believe there's a utilitarian element to it. So I'm not. I think I would throw the lever.
Okay. Would you push the fat guy?
No.
No. I don't think anybody but a sociopath.
My dividing line is between those two things.
I mean, yeah. Like from my perspective, I would absolutely throw the lever. Yeah. I don't want to kill five. Like one person dies versus five people. That's just better, right? But
yeah.
I don't pushing the fat guy off. Like there's a lot of assumptions. Like if I knew for a fact that this fat guy was going to stop it, or that he was going to land on the tracks, or that he wasn't going to bounce wrong. Like there's so many variables in pushing a dude off a bridge. But if we abstract all of that away, and I knew for a fact,
that's it. That's the whole point of this thought exercise.
Yeah, if we abstract that all away, and I knew that this fat guy would stop the trolley and save the lives of those people over there. It's tough. I don't know. There's questions I want to answer first.
What if you also knew that in doing so you would be tried for murder and held accountable for the death of the one person? Whereas if you just let it remain an accident, you wouldn't personally be held liable for any of that.
So I would.
There's a degree of self-sacrifice here as well, not just trading one life for five.
Well, and that goes to Minority Report kind of stuff, because if I pushed the guy off and he died, I would absolutely expect to be convicted of murder. Argument
if you threw the lever, you wouldn't?
But yeah, absolutely. Because there's nothing the lever and the guy are two different things, because whatever the negative externality of the trolley, the runaway trolley is with the lever, somebody's going to die, whether I do anything or not. Like my actions are almost inconsequential to the fact that there's life going to be lost. And so if I have the opportunity to minimize the life lost, there is absolutely no downside into me taking those actions.
Yeah.
Whereas the fat guy, there is no way for me to explain after the fact or to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that if I hadn't stopped the trolley, that those five people wouldn't have died. Like just because I preventing the action means that there's no way to prove that it would have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Our minds and our hearts reject this, even though it's just a thought exercise. We want to look for ways out. We want to find ways. And in the reenactment that they did in The Good Place, where Chidi was at the controls, they were also making fun of his natural indecisiveness, where he just can't make a decision. So he defaulted to killing the five people just because he couldn't make up his mind in time.
It's a great show, people, if you haven't seen The Good Place. Spoilers, apparently. But for the good.
But then they reset the trolley and do it again. He's like, okay, I know what I want to do. I want to pull the lever. And he pulls the lever. And they're like, okay, now we forgot to tell you in this variation of the trolley problem, the one person is a good friend of yours. And he's like on the tracks, just like, hey, how's it going? He's like, oh my gosh.
Which is a great, if you're in the afterlife and have infinite real scenarios to play out, you could really dial down into what somebody's morality is.
So you say this, but it's kind of become a bit of a hobby on the internet for people to come up with variations of the trolley problem, and some clever programs have gone as far as to make Java-based or even apps that you can download on your phone. So I found two games that are basically just acting out different iterations of the trolley problem. One's called the Trolley Problem, and the other's called Moral Machine. I'll put links in the show notes, but you can go to them and actually. It's a bit cheeky. Like, for instance, the first time you do it, you throw the switch and it shows the trolley actually go down the tracks and it gruesomely kills the person and it says something cheeky. Anyway, it's good. and then you can start to see the different variations and ideas, what they're trying to get at here.
I find it so cute that you're just discovering morality in video games, and that's been a thing for flippin' ever.
No, it's not, which is the reason I asked you the next question almost immediately after our last episode, which is, Josh, what I want you to do is just kind of go out there and look like books and movies and stuff like that and see if you can find instances of where they've used the trolley problem or something like it in some type of media that you've observed, and we'll talk about it on the show.
Okay. So are we going to transition to places that we've seen morality used in popular media?
No. Before we go to that, I want to talk about... So up to this point, we've really just talked about this as a thought exercise. It's very implausible. Why would you have these controls? Why wouldn't you be able to yell and tell them to get off the tracks? Lots of things. So where I asked myself, and did some research, is where in the real world does this thing ever, if ever, actually happen? And there are some places.
Okay.
For instance, we are now in the process of operationalizing driverless cars. And you always talk about how a decision of an artificial intelligence, or maybe even our own human intelligence, is just a weighted average.
Right.
And a driverless car is capable of taking in so much information and processing it so quickly that it could potentially be making a very trolley problem-like decision.
Yes. And its outcome or its output or its decision that it ends up making might be something entirely different from what a normal person in that same circumstance would have made.
Right. So this is one way. And this is one of the things I found on one of these games. If you have a driverless car and it has an algorithm inside of it, and let's say you have a car full of 5 people and a small child runs out in the road, does the car swerve and potentially hit like a barrier or something that could endanger the lives of the 5 people inside? Or does it just hit the child and, count that as a win in the school of utilitarianism thought?
So this was an interesting question that was specifically brought up on that show Upload that was on Amazon, which is a good show. We should talk about that someday on the podcast. But one of the aspects is they had driverless cars, and one toggle that they mentioned, they didn't go into depth about it, but they talked about you can set your car to prioritize driver or prioritize pedestrian.
And that's funny that it was just an individual decision instead of something we all decided as a society and enforced together.
Yeah, let's be clear. This will absolutely be a federal government mandate.
Yeah, this will not be you don't get a switch inside of your car where you get to decide.
Yeah, no, because guess what? Like, if it's left up to the individual, they're going to prioritize driver. If it's left up to everyone else, they're going to prioritize pedestrian. But
this also feels like a transitional problem. Like, it's going to be a problem for a few years while we have, regular people on the street and driverless cars on the street. But once we transition to all driverless cars, I just don't see how this is ever going to come up.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. Even during this transition period, driverless cars have cameras everywhere, and they have full data logs of everything that's happened.
And great brakes. They can react faster and sooner than we can.
That's somebody mentioned that on a YouTube video or a podcast I was listening to. Driverless cars, if nothing else, will be able to make the decision to start braking. Even if it's less than a second sooner than a person would actually start braking. That's going to take
still way sooner.
It's going to take so much energy out of the equation that there's going to be a lot less damage done.
Yeah, you're right. So 99.999% of the time, the result is just going to be the car stops and no loss of life.
Well, we're talking no loss of life, but there might be driver whiplash. There might be some problems there. Like, there's going to be all kinds of legal stuff around.
Sure. Right. Yeah. I've actually seen some great videos about like where there's like a Tesla that's capturing from cameras in the world around it, and the internal software identified a threat to the driver, but the car wasn't driving, the person did. And so it recorded the accident, but you can see like it was like 2 full seconds before the driver reacted to what was happening that the car noticed it and would have started doing something.
Which is awesome, especially when we get snarky talking AIs like Jarvis, because after you get in the accident, it can first confirm that you're okay and then tell you, I saw that coming from a mile away. I don't know why you're so slow and stupid.
Yeah, because that's what you need when you just lost, $50,000 worth of property and probably, tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills is an AI to rub some salt in the wound.
This is a switch that I do want in all of my AI-driven machinery in my life. I want a sarcasm and snarkiness switch that I can just dial to 11 on every one of my devices.
Jarvis is kind of like that in those movies.
Oh, yeah, very much so. He's very sarcastic, which is great.
Okay, so that's kind of a futuristic one, driverless cars. Yeah, we can kind of have our own set of thought exercises surrounding what do we program the algorithm in a driverless car to value as far as if a life or death decision has to be made. Okay, that's one. One that dates back hundreds, if not thousands of years is, overworked hospital where you're triaging patients. This is an algorithm where you have to use some type of deontological or utilitarian algorithm for determining where you're going to risk loss of life.
So I have not done any research prior to the show in this. This is just information that's in my head, so it could be wrong. I'm going to preface it with that. But triage was a thing that was developed, I believe, in the 20th century for doctors to evaluate and start dealing with patients.
Well, that would be a great correction if that were the case, but I assume the idea of just if you have one doctor and 3 people in need, how do you decide which one to treat first?
Right. And apparently, from what I can remember, we'll do research and follow up on this next episode. But from what I can remember, it was first come, first serve, hands down. And that's what the Hippocratic Oath was for. And then I think triage was something that came into more battlefield situations or emergency situations where a ton of people flow in at the same time. And this is a process you can implement to maximize the life saved.
Right. So that's a very utilitarian approach. And what you said, first come, first serve, no matter what, feels very deontological. Like it's an objective right or wrong. Like whoever got here first gets treated first.
Yeah, and it's intuitive, and it feels good and feels just initially. But when you're talking about medical emergencies, that may not be the best answer.
Sure. And you could have this person that's gravely injured. You might not have the skill or the equipment, but they're going to take a lot of your effort and a lot of time, and they may die anyway. Or these other people that you could stop helping that person and help them instead, and they'll likely survive and be well, but they could use your attention as well. It's complicated.
I'm going to quote another scene from American Dad. He was in the street and got hit by a car, and he had like bones sticking out of his arm and things. And there was an urgent care center that was like right there. So he walked into it and he goes, "I need to see a doctor." She goes, "Get in line." And he gets in this line of people waiting to see the urgent care doctor. And he talks to with his arm, his bone sticking out or whatever. And he just talks to the person in front of him. He goes, "May I go in front of you? I am very near death." And she goes, and the person in front of him goes, "No, my elbow feels funny."
Yeah. A first come, first serve.
Exactly.
If we're going to talk about lines, you are very much in favor of waiting in line and waiting your turn no matter what. You've made that very clear repeatedly on this show.
Yes.
I would be, there's not a lot of times where, it's usually just waiting to pay for your groceries or to get through a fast food line. But what if there really was some kind of emergency where somebody needed fast food faster than you?
There's no such thing as a fast food emergency, first of all. The only time this is ever going to come into play is if we're actually in a hospital. We're going to the ER, there's a medical emergency, and then somebody gets seen or treated before us that showed up after us. And in those situations, I want to see the chart. Excuse me, how bad is that guy really? Because he wasn't coughing up that much blood when he first got here.
Yeah, and they talked a little bit about that in Freakonomics. Of the sign, they gave a list of like presenting patients at an ER and what symptoms they had were most likely to result in death if not seen immediately. Do you remember what the number one was?
It was something very like you wouldn't expect.
It was SOB.
What? I don't know what SOB is.
Shortness of breath.
Oh, that's right. Shortness of breath. Yes.
That was the number one sign if someone shows up in an ER and is complaining of shortness of breath, that if you don't treat them first, they're likely to die.
Interesting. So if I show up with a bone sticking out of my arm and somebody that complains of a little
tell them
wheezing,
you're feeling short of breath. That's right.
This is
how utilitarian of you.
It's another one of Ben Rich's life hacks. If you go to the ER, that doesn't matter what for, just say it's for shortness of breath and you'll get seen faster.
That's right. I'm going to go on a little tangent because that reminds me of a story. So bad parenting. We were upstairs in our house in Colorado, and my son comes upstairs, and he's done something he's done his entire life. He's wrapped his hand up in his shirt, and he's done that ever since he was a baby. And that meant he's wounded his hand, and he doesn't want us to see it, but it also means it's hurt. So we're like, "What's going on, Michael?" And I made him unwrap it from his shirt, and it was actually gravely wounded. He had been downstairs trying to make something out of cardboard and couldn't find scissors or whatever, so he tried to use my wife's rotary fabric cutter.
Oh, geez, those are
which is like a
sharp.
pizza cutter with a razor blade on the end of it.
Those are no joke.
And he was pushing across the cardboard and literally sliced across his wrists, like inches from his radial artery. Like he could have like severed his radial artery.
Oh man, that's bad.
And he had like a 2-inch gash across his wrist that was just bleeding all over the place. I'm like, holy crap, we got to take you to the emergency room. So, I apply direct pressure and stuff, but by the time we get to the emergency room, the bleeding's under control. And as bad as it feels as a parent to be holding a child's wrist in your hand and, knowing he needs stitches, from a strict medical perspective, he is not urgent.
He's not going to die from this. It's a deep cut, right. But like he's stable.
You can sit there without the stitches all day, and his condition will get no worse whatsoever.
Yeah, I can see that. But as a parent, you want to burn this place down if he's not seen this second.
Right. So they finally got us in, and while we're sitting in the hospital triage room waiting for the nurse to come in and clean out the wound and evaluate us, they wheel into the room in the wheelchair a boy probably in his mid-teens dressed in like gang apparel, and he obviously has multiple gunshot wounds to the abdomen.
Okay.
Like right into our room. Like the room that we were in. You know, this is not a group room. This is like one room. They thought the room was vacant. We were in it. And my son and I, I'm sitting there holding his wrist. He's holding his wrist, and we look at this guy, and the nurse looks at us, and we're staring at this guy in this like white shirt with just blood all down the front of him. I've never seen anything like it, Josh. And they're like, you guys got to get out of here. We're like, yeah.
I don't think so. This is our room. You go somewhere.
That's what we should have said. My elbow really hurts.
Yeah, there you go.
So we got up and got out. They put the whole hospital on lockdown because apparently the protocol for when there's a gang victim who survives a shooting is that the whoever shot him could potentially show up at the hospital to finish the job.
Oh, jeez.
So then we went out in the waiting room and sat there for like 6 hours while the hospital was on lockdown because we lost our place in line to the multiple gunshot wound victim.
Ben against bureaucracy failed because you probably fell off the list at that point because they had you marked as seen and you didn't go up and raise a ruckus enough to get back there again.
Yeah, he eventually got his stitches. He has a wicked cool scar on his hand.
Well, that's fun.
So that's driverless cars, patient triage. There's another situation I want to talk about that you probably found yourself in. As a gamer, particularly in massive multiplayer online role-playing games, everybody has a role to play. And you end up in a triage type situation. You know, like let's say you're having a big boss battle, whatever they're called. I don't know what you call them. A raid. And you are, let's say, a healer, and you have multiple members in your party that require healing. How do you decide who to heal?
Yeah. Are you aware that like I'm a healer in these games that I play?
Yes, like, I'm aware. That's why I'm asking you this problem. This is the trolley problem of the healer.
Well, first of all, I just like having the power of life and death over complete strangers. It's a feeling of empowerment that I need in my life.
Okay, do you ever use it in a like chaotic evil or no, let's see, lawful evil kind of way where you're like, that person's annoying me, I'm not going to heal them?
Yep, absolutely, all the time, 100%. Like this is like, all right, people, this is the behavior.
Makes you wonder if that happens in emergency rooms.
It happens.
That person's annoying me, I'm not going to see them.
It happens everywhere all the time, and like even in emergency rooms, like that person's annoying me, I'm going to slow roll them, or I'm just going to hesitate 30 more seconds before I go talk to them, and it just adds up.
Yeah.
So
all right. So back to healers.
Back to healers. No, I there is a certain level of expectation of performance that I have from you, and if you deviate from that, guess what? You're not getting any delicious healing from this guy. Like you go run off all by yourself while I'm still trying to tank up on mana between fights. Like guess what? You're just going to die because you're not obeying the proper protocols.
Okay, so how do we put that into all these philosophical schools of thoughts? That's kind of deontological. Like you feel that there's an objective right or wrong, and in order for someone to be entitled to your services as a healer, they have to obey the rules. And if they don't, they deserve to not get healed.
I feel like that's more transactional. Like we're all here trying to achieve the same thing. We all know the most efficient and optimal way to do that. And if you deviate from it, then clearly you're not with the program.
But what if they have a good reason that they deviated? You know, there's an accident or their connection lagged or something.
Well, then I don't want them in my party. Like if they're lagging the whole time, it's like we need to kick you out and find somebody better. Like I don't know. This is because there's no consequences. This
decrease the surplus population.
The morality of this whole thing just goes out the window because there's absolutely no consequences to my actions.
Okay, I got it. You just they die and they respawn and they're back to life.
Yeah,
it has a minor impact.
I appreciate and I respect your attempt to make a moral dilemma out of healing in a video game, but I have a much better version of morality in a video game. Okay,
go for it.
It's called Papers, Please. I'm sure I've made you play it.
We've talked about it on the show.
Excellent. Papers, Please is a fantastic game. Go buy it. It's wonderful.
No, it's not. Don't.
There is this great story moment. Like again, for those of you who haven't heard it before, Papers, Please is a game where you are a...
Okay, you have told this story on the show, but I want you to tell it again in the context of this discussion.
Of the morality, yes. You are a checkpoint guard at some Eastern European country during the Soviet era. And
like the height of the Cold War, very bleak.
Yeah, glory to Arstotzka. And like the anthem plays in the background, the whole 9 yards.
Dun, dun, dun,
and the game is so good at just like making you totally objectify these people. Like they're not real people. But then every once in a while they'll come up with like dialogue where these are people, but like they just...
But you're just a bureaucrat. All you're there doing is checking people's documents to make sure they are authorized across the border.
And if they're not, you're supposed to reject them. You kick them out, and they get hauled out by armed guards with AK-47s and taken into another building, and they are never seen or heard from again.
Right.
And so that works both ways, because it's like, I don't care your story, what your person is. Give me your documents. If they're good, I'll let you through. But the thing is, the game lets you put through anybody that you want, or reject anybody that you want for whatever reason you want. So you have complete, total control over these people's lives. And like I did tell the story before, I worked my butt off to get my kid in this game, which you never see. He's just a nameless thing.
You earned enough money to buy him some paper and some crayons, and he drew you a "I love you, Daddy" sign.
Yes, he drew a "I love you, Daddy,"
and you hang it on the wall in your little cubicle where you bleakly check people's papers at this Russian block checkpoint all day.
And the first person that comes in makes a comment, like put all their documents up, and they look at the picture like, "Oh, who drew this? It looks like they have some kind of mental handicap." And I swear, Ben, I stopped. This is a game where time is of the essence. And I stared at the screen at this person like, are you kidding me?
Did you just insult my child?
How dare you? And you look and like, yeah, all their stuff checks out, but I've got that big red button, buddy. And I can send you to some gulag somewhere forever. And there is absolutely no downside for me. How dare you? And I struggled, I struggled with that decision.
There's no downside for you from a utilitarian point of view. From a deontological point of view, there absolutely is.
Yes, because I am the exact agent of this person's presumable horrible demise.
Like, for you to get revenge on her for insulting your child is very morally and ethically wrong from a deontological point of view.
Oh, but so satisfying when I hit that red button every single time that lady walked into my stupid checkpoint guard check. I'm like, oh, it's you. See you in the gulag, lady. Bye-bye.
All right.
All right. Well, all right. I'll give you another one. This is one we haven't talked about before. So this is a game called Mass Effect, and this is hands down by far and away my favorite video game franchise of all time, because it has such rich characters and such beautiful story dripping with details that are just, it's glorious. Go play Mass Effect, all three of them. They're fantastic. Skip.
I can't disagree with you on this one because I've never tried it.
Oh, you've never played. Okay. Well, anyway, it's a sci-fi RPG. You gather this crew of people to help you fight the big bad guy, and it's this Scooby gang of misfits, and you get to know them and you talk to them, and there's so many different dialogue. You really get to know these individual characters, and you really get into their story, and you feel like you know them as like people and friends. And there's one mission you do towards the end of the first one. Spoilers for Mass Effect, everybody. Where it is,
and maybe Star Wars.
It is a straight up almost a trolley problem, where it's in order for any of us to escape this, somebody's got to go take care of that thing, and they are going to die, and it's going to be one of these two. Pick. And I sat there. The game does this thing where it's not real life, so there's no time critical nature to it. It's just sitting there on a dialogue box waiting for you to pick who's going to die.
Right, so it's like you paused real life.
Yeah, and I put the controller down, and I sat back on the couch, and I sat there frozen for 20 minutes, because both of these characters were like, I had
20 minutes?
At least, because I felt so vested in the story.
That's a long time, Josh.
I know, but I felt so vested in these characters
that's also good game design, in that you believed that it wasn't going to let you take it back or find some way out. That whatever you decided in this moment was going to be very much final.
And to the credit of the game producer, it was. Whoever you send on this mission is gone forever, because you import your save file from the first game into the second game into the third game. So all of your decisions carry through all three games. So if you send this person to their death, they are dead forever.
Whenever that happens in movies, it's like, I don't know, the other characters never forgive the one that made the decision.
I think that's a normal thing for just
like, how
people.
Could you?
Well, that's a normal thing that people do, is they want to externalize.
And they have the luxury of doing that because they didn't make the decision.
Well, it's survivor's guilt. It's like one of their best friends died, and they feel bad, and they want to take these negative feelings and they want to make them come from an outside source, because it's easier to address if it's coming from outside of you. And so it's so much easier to blame the person who made the decision rather than to just live with the guilt that you lived and they didn't.
Yeah, survivor guilt. And I think that's why it's so hard to be a military commander, in the past wars where you really were fighting wars of attrition and you had to make decisions that would cost lives.
Yeah. I have nothing to say about that.
Yeah. Well, I realized there's another situation like this that I actually had in my own life, like a real life trolley problem.
Ooh, tell me, who died?
So this is the decision you have hypothetically when child delivery scenario arises where both the mother's and the child's life are threatened. And you potentially could have to make a rapid decision to either do the kind of medical things that are most likely to preserve the life of the mother, or do the kind of medical things that are most likely to preserve the life of the child. But you can't necessarily just equally preserve both.
It's a prioritize mother versus prioritize child. Like, obviously,
yes.
The doctors are going to try to save everybody, but they want to know which one you weight higher.
Yes, exactly.
That is a horrible decision to have to make.
Yeah. So when our...
Oh, go ahead. Please tell the actual story.
So when our fourth child was born, I was away to military training. I was trying to squeeze in military training right before he was born. He wasn't due for another 6 weeks, and I went away for a 2-week course. I think it was maybe 4 weeks long. And I was 2 weeks into it, and I'm sitting in class, and somebody runs into class and hands me a Post-it note and says, "Your wife is in the hospital. Call this number." So I ran out of class and I called the number. I'm like, "Honey, what's wrong?" And she said, "I went in for a routine checkup and I was diagnosed with preeclampsia." Preeclampsia is pregnancy-induced hypertension. It was detected through protein in her urine, which is a sign of distress, basically high blood pressure because of the pregnancy. And the only known cure for it is to get the baby out. But he was well premature, like below 4 pounds birth weight.
Ooh, okay.
And they were trying to deliver the baby immediately because preeclampsia, if not alleviated, can potentially kill them both.
Okay. So there's better shot of you both living if we get the baby out.
Right. Yeah. So they were in a hurry. I said, "Well, are you stable now?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Is the baby okay?" They're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, see if you can stall him. I'm on my way home." Because I knew that like the kids were at home and nobody was taking care of them. So I grabbed the next flight I could. I flew home. She was still in the hospital. The neighbors did that great military thing neighbors do where they banded together and took care of our children. I took the children back and went and saw her in the hospital. And she had gotten a doctor with a bit cooler head to kind of calm everybody down and stop trying to, like cut the baby out with the sword like Hakeem on Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. So, but they're still in an awful hurry. So they're giving her drugs that are supposed to steroids that are supposed to cause the baby's lungs to mature, because that's the last thing to grow in an unborn baby. They would threaten their life when they come out. So he's getting the like microwave for the last 5 minutes treatment. Oof. While he's still in there, and they're pushing like, let's get the baby out. So they finally roll us into the labor and delivery room. They give her Pitocin to induce contractions, and she starts pushing. They've got monitors on her and on the baby, and on the monitor, I can see the baby's heartbeat every time she starts to have a contraction dip into the like low teens.
Ooh, okay.
And the doctors start to do something I've never seen before, and this is our fourth, so I've been through this a time or two. They start to whisper to each other where we can't hear them. And more medical professionals start coming in and out of the room, and I can tell they're prepping for surgery. Like they're just doing those kinds of things, but no one's telling us this at this point. The nurses are just there, kind of through gritted teeth, saying, "Push really hard."
We don't want to panic you as parents, but we're going to take this decision out of your hands very shortly.
So I'm grabbing my wife's hand, and I can feel the tension just mounting in the room. And then the nurse does something I've never before or since seen a nurse do. My wife has a contraction. You can see it on the monitor of the muscles contracting and trying to push the baby out of her body. And as soon as the contraction's over, they tell her to push again at the bottom when she's not having a contraction.
Ooh, okay.
So they're rushing her now to just push full time. And my wife was so heroic. It takes my breath away even to think about it. She just summoned every last ounce of strength she had in her entire body, and she delivered the baby. And when he came out, he had the cord wrapped around his neck like 3 times, and he was all blue. Ooh. So they unwrapped the cord. He took a breath. He turned pink. Everything was okay, and it was like such a relief that we just held each other and sobbed and cried together. It was so emotional. But there was this moment where we had this trolley problem where they were like, okay, we can, I don't know, do an emergency C-section and try to get the baby out, or, we can let you keep pushing, but the baby might have brain damage, or, whatever. It really was the actual real life trolley problem, almost.
I am glad that something like that has never happened to me. Like, being in that situation must have sucked. And how much input did you have, and how much input did Alicia have into this entire process? Because I feel like in these big, tense medical situations, the doctors have an opinion of what should happen, and they don't ever come out and say, do this. They always like, well, these are your options. What do you want to do?
Yeah, and we never quite reached that moment because they were still doing the kinds of things you do when you're trying to have both positive outcomes. But let's say he wasn't coming down the birth canal and his heart rate kept dropping, then they would have gone to that point where they're like, okay, we can either let you keep pushing and potentially risk brain damage or even death of the baby, or we can do an emergency C-section.
Right. Ugh. Well, kudos to you and Alicia for getting through that. More kudos to Alicia. Really.
To her. So he ended up in intensive care for 2 weeks and then came out, and he was always a little bit small, but right now he's a normal, healthy, intelligent, wonderful teenage boy, and I'm glad I didn't have to choose between him and my wife.
There's no such thing as a normal teenage boy, but I understand what you're going for.
Yeah. So those are 4 scenarios in which real life that we kind of have the trolley problem. Driverless cars, patient triage, maybe a woman in labor, or even sometimes in video games. But now I think we can talk about the examples that you and I found where people had reenacted these in stories that we watch and consume.
Okay, and we've talked about a couple already. Well, I did anyway, about the video game thing. But we're going to go specifically into movies. It's more likely that listeners have seen the movies that we're going to talk about versus the video games that we have played. So let's alternate these because we both have different scenarios where this came up. And I think mine are a little different than yours because I took my homework assignment a little differently than you did.
That's good.
And
that's what gives our podcast variety.
Well, we can talk about the trolley problem all day, but it boils down to your personal beliefs, like in your personal philosophies. Like if you're utilitarian or what's the other one you keep saying? It's such a fancy word.
Deontological.
Deontological. See, I disagree with it so inherently that I don't even know the word for it.
Yeah, but over the course of this discussion, you and I have reversed positions where in some scenarios you choose a more deontological perspective and I choose a more utilitarian perspective. So it's not just clearly one or the other.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I like to think I'm a very utilitarian person, not just in ethics, but in just all decision making anyway. Cost outweigh the benefits kind of thing.
But like, for instance, like waiting in line, you default to a very deontological thing where your highest overriding value is who got in line first.
No,
and I might be willing to let someone cut in line in front of me if I thought they had a more urgent need.
You see, I'm not going to correct you there because this is the line, you will respect it. But I think what you're missing is that my version of utilitarian does the same math where I'm trying to optimize utility. The difference is I'm not optimizing utility in the world. I'm optimizing utility for this guy. He's got 2 thumbs and co-hosting this podcast.
Yeah. And sometimes that could look more deontological than it can utilitarian.
In some situations like standing in line, yeah, it looks like that when really it's just, I'll burn the world down. I'm going to get my fast food first. That's how this works.
Yeah, and that has a name too. I just don't know it because I didn't take philosophy.
Selfish, narcissist. There's a lot of words for it.
But that's one of the main points of philosophy is giving things names that don't sound like that.
I love the philosophy class that I took in college because it was so fuzzy. There is no way to read a book about philosophy and learn philosophy. You literally just have to discuss and discover your own, this is how my brain works. I don't know how I got here, but this is how it is. And maybe knowing these words and understanding the different systems can possibly shift your decision making. But that takes a monumental amount of effort because it's really hard to change some of these paths in your brain. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right, so let's take turns. You take one, and then I'll take one.
Okay, so I was looking less for trolley problems and just for more of the interesting moral dilemmas that I've noticed in pop culture in certain movies that I really enjoyed for different reasons.
Okay.
And the first ones that I'm going to bring up is got to be one of my favorite. And it was from the movie The Incredibles, the first one, which is a fantastic movie.
Maybe my all-time favorite superhero movie.
I agree. It's up there. Spoilers for The Incredibles, everybody. But there is a scene where Mr. Incredible, the super strength superhero, is stuck. He's been captured by the evil genius, not the supervillain, Syndrome. And the situation was he had just presumably killed Mr. Incredible's whole family. Like, surface-to-air missiles shot down their jet. Everybody in the room thought that they were all dead. And Mr. Incredible...
So he's now the man with nothing to lose.
Exactly. And he summons this amazing, his super strength above and beyond what he's normally capable of, and pulls his restraints out just enough to try to snatch Syndrome so he could presumably crush him to death. But his indispensable number 2 was her name, Mirage. She pushed...
Yeah, nearby minion
pushes Syndrome out of the way, and she's the one that gets snatched. And so then Mr. Incredible demands to be released, or he will crush Mirage.
It's a good guy with a hostage. The good guy's bound by his moral code. So can the bad guy just call his bluff, or can the good guy really use a hostage to get what he wants?
And this is why I love this situation so much, because presumably Mirage has a ton of value and is a critical component to Syndrome's entire organization. And Mr. Incredible says, "Release me or I'll crush her." And he goes, and Syndrome correctly and immediately identifies the situation as a complete impasse. Because if Mr. Incredible crushes Mirage to death, then Syndrome is presumably out of number 2, but he still has Mr. Incredible locked to the wall. Whereas if Mr. Incredible doesn't crush her and lets her go, then he's still... if he lets Mr. Incredible go, now he's got a rampaging superhero with nothing to lose in his base.
Right, that wasn't an impasse. That was he'd already won. You can't win.
Right, yeah, he correctly identified the scenario as he's already won. There's no way that he can lose this. There are some negative aspects, but any outcome, he's still on top. And so he immediately looks at me and goes, "Oh, that sounds a little dark for you. Go ahead." And like you said, just totally calls his bluff.
Yeah, and he kind of identifies their place on the chart. Nah, you're lawful good. I'm, chaotic evil. You're not going to do it.
Yeah. And I really very, very much appreciated that moment in that movie, because there are, and of course, the outcome of being that the superhero with his moral code could not actually do it and let Mirage go, and then everything goes on as normal. But
it's the reason those kind of scenes always work in movies, where the bad guy takes a hostage and it's actual peril because we believe he might kill the person he's taken hostage. But the good guys don't or can't take hostages because no one's going to believe that they're going to kill the hostage.
Yeah. There's a couple counter examples that I can say. There was Speed, where the bad guy took the hostage and then Keanu Reeves shot the hostage.
Yeah, shoot the hostage.
Yeah, that was a whole discussion they had beforehand. There is a show called Archer. Are you aware of Archer?
Yes.
All right, so the pilot episode, the bad guy was escaping and he grabbed a hostage and put a gun to her head, and then Archer, the good guy, immediately grabs one of his buddies and puts him in front and puts a gun to their head. It goes, and everybody there's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Mexican standoff," and the bad guy's like, "But I don't care about your hostage." And just the sheer amount of confusion led to the situation being resolved. It was awesome.
Just confusing the bad guy made him win.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a good gambit. Just see if we can confuse him to death. All right. You got anything else to say about that situation, Incredibles?
No. One of the best superhero movies out there.
Okay. So this one to me almost felt like the writers of the film were sitting in philosophy class and said, "We need to make this part of our movie." And I sent you a clip of it, and you were like, "You're right. They almost used the vocabulary from the textbook."
Yeah. This example, you couldn't spoon feed it to somebody easier than this.
Yeah. Okay. So you remember this if you've seen it. It's the, 2002. I don't remember what year it came out. The Spider-Man movie that was directed by Sam Raimi with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, the first one.
And when that came out, I was so in love with the character Spider-Man all over again, because that was such a great depiction. And Tobey Maguire went downhill with Spider-Man fast. But please, we're not talking about that.
Yeah. But okay, so Green Goblin is just, chaotic evil running around doing chaotic things, and he's on his glider, and he goes to this cable car that's going across a bridge, and he's got Mary Jane stranded up on top of the bridge.
An actual trolley, by the way. It is an actual trolley.
This is the actual trolley to demonstrate the trolley problem. So he blows up the motor house that's got the cable on it, and he grabs the cable that holds up this car. And how many people were in that cable car? 20, 30?
Yeah, dozens of people, yeah.
And he's just holding them with his arm because whatever, it's a comic book. And he flies up on top of the bridge, and he's got Mary Jane in one hand and the cable car in the other hand, and he's taunting Spider-Man. And he says something to the effect of, "This is the trolley problem, ha ha ha." And I don't remember what he says. It's what sounded like what he said.
He's trying to get Spider-Man to be on his side. He's trying to make him realize, like, it's your morals that are holding you back, and I'm going to demonstrate right now. Your morals are going to screw you over in this situation.
So what would you say it was that was Green Goblin's objective, that it was just trying to show Spider-Man that if he just stopped caring about people, that he would be better off?
He was trying to, I think, this is a trope in a lot of comic books, is that the supervillains are trying to claw the heroes down to their level. And like, you're the same as me, just the only thing that's separating the two of us is your stupid pretension.
You think you're better than me.
Is your stupid pretension to law and order.
Okay. So Green Goblin has this moment then where he throws them both at the same time. He throws Mary Jane off one side of the bridge and the trolley car cable off the other side of the bridge, and now both are plummeting to their doom, presumably so that Spider-Man has to throw the lever and either kill Mary Jane or kill the trolley car full of people.
Which is...
I like this dilemma up to this point.
This situation is screaming for the how it should have ended treatment, because Spider-Man should have immediately responded with, "Oh no, if I only had access to cables that I could deploy at high speed that had incredible strength to save both parties simultaneously."
Right, because of course he does, like all superheroes do when presented with the trolley problem. They reject the problem.
Yeah, and saves both through daring do.
Right, which is what we want to happen. It's very cathartic to watch the superhero with great power comes great responsibility and save the trolley car full of people and the girlfriend, and then defeat the bad guy, and the only thing that happens is, whatever, he gets punched in the face or something.
And back in 2002, I was young enough to still appreciate those kinds of things. Now, when that kind of stuff comes on TV, I boo it, because I feel like I'm a more cultured consumer of this kind of content. And it's like, oh, boo. It's like straight out of Philosophy 101. Get out of here.
and when I'll put the clip in the show notes, because when you watch it, it really is.
It feels so dated when you, like, I watched that clip. Oh man, like we have such, maybe this is what
Green
it is.
Goblin just snarls it, and he sounds like he's reading straight from a philosophy textbook.
I feel like we have just matured as a comic book movie consuming audience, and just the Marvel Disney merger has just shattered like all of the glass ceilings we thought existed for comic book movies.
I'm going to be thinking about what you just said for a while, though. I like how you said that it's a trope in comic books of the villains trying to show the heroes that they're the same.
That's one of the supervillain demographics. Like, what is your motivation as a supervillain? There's like, great personal
Definitely
wealth.
Feels like that with Magneto.
Yeah, Magneto is an example of a very good and a very complex comic book villain, because there is a point where he just straight up gives up on his entire scheme of trying to create this alternate or this superior race of mutants, and he's like, you know what? Forget it. And he creates his own island nation populated by mutants, and he's like, you know what? Forget it. I'm out. I'm done dealing with you people. I'm just starting my own country. And he did it, and it was awesome until it was completely destroyed.
All right, what's your number 2?
Okay, so my number 2 is, if we're going to talk about spoon feeding trolley problems, buddy, I cannot help but bring up The Matrix Reloaded, which is...
You're going to have to refresh my memory.
This is the second Matrix movie. This is where Neo is accepted that he is the one, and he's going through the whole, hero's journey thing. It's ridiculous. But towards the end of the movie, he meets the architect, and he's put in a room with this guy who presumably is the program that wrote The Matrix. And the architect's like, this is the worst example of tell, don't show. Like, it's a movie sin. Like,
yeah, there's just this long, really like dense college level essay of exposition in this room.
And it breaks the tone, it breaks the pacing. Like, there's a lot of problems with this scene, but it boils down to, he explains that this has played out multiple times before, and we're going to burn everything, your entire rebel culture, to the ground in the real world outside of the Matrix, and it's your job to go and restart the process. Like, you're going to go pick the people that get saved. And if you don't, well, then you're all just going to die, and there's nothing we can do about it. And
so that's the trolley problem?
Well, no, that's the setup, and then he offers them the 2 doors. If you go that way, you get to pick the handful of people that get to restart your rebel civilization. And like, yes, the people that you know will die, but the cycle will repeat and you're going to save more lives. If you pick that door, you could kind of maybe have a shot at saving your girlfriend. Pick one.
But then everything else burns to the ground.
But then the idea being that if he's not going to restart the rebellion thing, then it's just going to end here, and this will be the final iteration of it.
Okay, I see how you see that as a trolley problem. He's got the lever, and he's like, you can save the one, you know the one. So this is that version of the trolley problem, where you know the one. Or you can save the many. But in this case, it's a lot more than 5.
Yeah, it's like a whole civilization kind of thing.
Okay. Yes, and Neo does the same thing as Spider-Man when Goblin threw the things off the thing. He's like, I reject your...
Well, no, he absolutely went out the door to go save his girlfriend, and then he gave his line like, if I were you, I would hope we don't meet again. Like, he had no idea of what was going to happen after that, because, like, nobody did. But, yeah, eventually it works out in his favor. But at the time, he didn't know that. Like, he couldn't reject the problem because he had no alternative to.
I don't remember this as being an iteration of Trolley Problem, but I absolutely agree with you that it was. You said this came to your mind when you were thinking about this?
When I was thinking about, like, you showed me the Green Goblin one. And I was trying to think of a situation that was just cut and dry. A hero is faced with a decision, and he has to make it. And that was one where Neo's literally standing in a room with 2 doors, and he gets to pick one.
Right. Go through this door, go through that door. Yeah. But again, Neo kind of did like Peter Parker did in the first Spider-Man movie. He just he kind of made the decision, like he dove after Mary Jane first, but he also saved the trolley car.
Yeah. Now, the only thing I appreciate of that whole scene, because again, the scene is a mess and it screws with the movie, and there's so many problems with it, but he's in a room that are full of TV screens. I don't even remember that detail. And
I remember it very much so, because you can see like every iteration of past Neo having this decision.
Well, and that's the thing, is every screen is a possible decision, or one thing that he could do, one of the options that he has for any given moment in time. And one little detail that I appreciate very much in that scene is when he turned to the left to go through the door to save his girlfriend, every single TV screen also turned to the left and went to go save his girlfriend. There was not a single alternate future where he turned to the right to save the civilization.
Wow, I did not notice that. That was a really cool thing you just taught me.
Well, if you ever go rewatch that movie, which is bad, then you can appreciate that little detail.
Okay, well, I'm going to skip ahead to one that I thought of that has a similar dilemma in it that I think is good. And that is the most recent Tom Cruise Mission Impossible movie called Mission Impossible Fallout.
Okay.
If you remember in this one, early on, some separatists sell 3 plutonium spheres taken from like a Soviet nuclear missile to this, I don't know, shadowy underground organization that could potentially utilize them for terrorist purposes.
Okay.
And the kind of overriding arc of conflict in this is how Ethan Hunt, as the leader of his team of spies who accomplish impossible missions, has to do a mission where the stakes are, like world domination or global terrorism or international, mass disasters and deaths and those kinds of things. But he also has to value the lives of the members of his team. And his higher-ups, very high in government, look at him and that decision and think that he's irresponsible. That his tendency to jeopardize the mission in order to preserve the lives of the members of his team shows that he doesn't have what it takes to make these kinds of decisions.
More aptly, that they don't want him to make those decisions because they want somebody that's going to prioritize the mission, because the higher-ups don't care about the individuals.
Right, and I think what the movie intends to show, and I think does successfully, is that their interpretation that he wasn't prioritizing the mission was wrong. And that by prioritizing his people, he was prioritizing the mission. And this is something we say we do in the military.
But we absolutely don't.
Mission first, people always. Or as I heard an Army sergeant say to me 2 weeks ago, mission first, but also people first, which means nothing's first.
It's this dichotomy where, like, we want people to perceive us as caring for our people, but we don't care about any of the people. Like, it's the mission.
Yes, that's the Army way.
Well, I think that's most of the military's way.
Well, okay, so the dilemma that they set up is they have this shadowy handoff where they're supposed to be handing over a case full of money to the terrorists, and they're going to sell them the 2 remaining plutonium spheres. I forget what happened to the third one. It got blown up or something. and then one of a third party arrives to steal everything, and somebody takes one of his crew's members hostage. And he takes action to save the life of his team member, and then the plutonium disappears.
Oh, no.
And, there's 2 high up bureaucrats that are, have long since spent their day in the field who are now just Monday morning quarterbacking this. And all that it looks like is you weren't willing to sacrifice the life of you weren't willing to throw the trolley lever to kill one person to save the lives of millions.
Yes, our missions are ridiculously important. You have your priorities wrong.
Right. And in the end, those same team members that he risked everything to save are the ones that put their lives on the line and risk everything to ensure that the mission ultimately succeeds. They recapture the plutonium and millions of people don't die.
And everybody lived happily ever after.
I liked this version of the iteration of the trolley problem. That by Ethan kind of rejecting pulling the lever and trying to save everyone showed that it was better than pulling the lever and sitting there and watching the train kill the one person.
Well, come on, Ben. First of all, this is a movie. So the version of the movie...
You said you didn't like the Matrix version. I like the Mission Impossible version.
Fair enough. But, if there was a version of this movie where Ethan Hunt let the guy die and then saved the plutonium, we'd all have been mad about it. Or the movie would have gone on to show that he was wrong and he had guilt about it and then he had to change. That would have been the new plot, is the character development.
If that's always the case.
We, as a movie-consuming person, we want to see the priority of people over the mission because that's what's really important.
Right. Who cares if the nuclear bomb blows off and kills millions of people? We don't know. We know this guy.
Exactly. That's what it comes down to, is the utility is maximized for us because we're weighting the average of the people we know very much highly than these faceless people. From a movie-consuming perspective.
Right. We're under no peril of this nuclear weapons getting out. And I guess that would be the better success of the movie if they could really make us feel like we want them to sacrifice the team member to save people.
Yeah. That would be a more successful way of telling it, but it would be more difficult. And then, like I said before, then the arc changes because implicitly I feel like the way that story goes then is how Ethan then is punished for letting that person die, and then his character has to evolve and develop to what we want it to be, where he's a more feeling, empathetic person again.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so that's one of my good ones. What was your next one?
So the last one that I came up with that I love to death, by the way, is in the original Ghostbusters movie.
Yes.
Where the EPA agent kicks in the door of the Ghostbusters, and he's got the utilities guy.
The clueless government bureaucrat.
Yeah, from the EPA. And he's got the city services, the electric meter reading guy with him.
Yeah.
And he's got his safety vest and his hard hat on, and he's just there. He's getting dragged along. And he's like, you are running an illegal thing in your basement, and it's the containment unit for all the ghosts.
You're in violation of the city health code.
Yeah, shut
it down.
The EPA, whatever. Yeah, and it's him just saying, you're going to shut it down, and we have a court order, and this guy's here to throw the switch. And then it's the Ghostbusters saying, if you shut this off, it's like setting off a nuclear bomb in downtown New York City. And so you got the EPA guy screaming at him, the law is on my side, I've got the court order, we're turning this thing off. And you got the Ghostbusters going, this is going to be the worst thing that has ever happened ever if you turn that switch off. And they're all looking at this random city worker who's getting paid minimum wage.
Okay, that's a really funny. So you're saying the city utility company worker is the guy holding the trolley lever?
Yes, and he has all these external pressures. And so, spoilers, but in the movie he ends up shutting it off, and it ends up being really, really bad. But what I love about that moment where he's and they show it, he's super conflicted, guys, I'm just doing my job here. And that's why he ends up saying something almost to that exact effect before he turns it off. And it reminds me of this study that was done. Again, I'm terrible at doing research before, but there was a study done at one of those big brain universities about the effect of authority over people's moral and ethical decision making.
Yes, is this the one where people like shock somebody?
They were pretending to be shocked, and so the person came in, and the person that was being studied was sat down, and there was a researcher with a lab coat and a clipboard. He said, "You will ask questions through this microphone to a person in another room. If they get the answer wrong, you push this button, and they will receive a mild electric shock that will increase in intensity as they get more and more questions wrong." And the person in the other room was also part of the experiment. They were in on it, and they weren't actually getting shocked.
Right. They were pretending to be shocked.
Yes, but every time they got a question wrong and got shocked, like it was like they were playing it up like at first like, oh, ha ha.
Yeah, scream in agony.
Yeah, they would scream like it got to a point where they would like the test subject would be reading the question, and the other guy is just screaming, "Let me out. I don't want to do this anymore. Let me out. I have a heart condition," like all these things. Yeah. And like the study was about if an authority figure can make somebody do something that they find morally and ethically objectionable just because that the person sitting in the seat can then externalize the responsibility for their actions and put it onto the other person. I think originally the study was about like how all these like Nazi officers did the atrocities that they did. And
I see.
So
as long as there's somebody in authority standing there telling you to do it, you'll do stuff. It's like you isolate yourself. Like, okay, back to our trolley problem. You're standing on the bridge and the fat guy's there, and there's someone that says, push the fat guy into the tracks.
And if it's a cop or if it's somebody that you perceive as an authority, you are far more likely to obey what they tell you to do than and then afterward blame them.
Wouldn't feel like you murdered him.
Exactly. And that's what happened to this poor city utilities worker guy. Is the EPA official with his court documents and all his fancy
turned
orders.
off the Ghostbusters containment unit.
Yeah, it's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following the orders of this guy over here.
Yeah. Good one. So I found several others, but I was pulled towards the works of Christopher Nolan because he has a real knack for doing this in a way. And one thing he does that the other guys are afraid to do is he doesn't pull punches on the actual consequences of the actions. So to mind, almost immediately came The Dark Knight, which was a classic the minute it came out and worth all the hype that it got. And one of the trolley problem-like scenarios that Bruce Wayne was presented with at one point is Joker and Batman end up together. I don't remember how it all got set up, but he basically tells Bruce that both Harvey Dent and I forget which girlfriend it was at the time.
Generic girlfriend who's going to die, number 3.
Yeah, Vicky Vale or whatever. Whoever it was, girlfriend that's going to die, are both rigged to diabolical contraptions on an unstoppable timer that will go off exactly 3 minutes from now. You don't have enough time to save both. Which one are you going to save?
Ha 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 ha.
Ha 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 ha. And I think it's exactly like you said. Joker was just trying to show, he kept saying this throughout the movie, I'm just trying to show everyone that you're all just like me.
Yeah. Like this is society with all of the facade peeled off.
Yes. And so Batman does like all heroes do, he rejects the trolley problem. He's like, no, we're going to save them both. So he turns to Commissioner Gordon and says, you go save Dent, I'm going to go save the girl. But the twist that was in the movie was delicious in that Joker had lied to them about who was at what location. And Batman ended up going to save Harvey Dent, and the commissioner was too late to save the girl.
Because the real cops just can't get it done in any kind of superhero movie.
Right. So only the hero had the power to at least get there on time and do something, but Harvey still got injured in it. But from his perspective, Batman chose to save him instead of the girl, and he wanted the choice to be the opposite way. He didn't realize. Anyway, whatever. It's complicated, but it was really delicious in the film.
The choice Batman made was he's going to go save his girlfriend. Like, he is a very utilitarian guy from my perspective. Like, it was like the way he phrased it. He was moving through the building. Where are you going? I'm going for the girl. Like, I don't even think he told the cops what to do. I think he was just on a mission to go save his girlfriend.
Right, and Harvey Dent was important. He was like the beacon to the people of standing up against the criminals in this city.
Right, and it's clear that thought process never even entered Bruce Wayne's mind. Like, he was going to save the girl.
Was acting pretty selfishly, although he did try to save Harvey as well. By sending Commissioner after him.
I'm going to go with maybe on that one. Like I don't know. Even if Batman had full faith in the cops, like, it was far more likely the person that he went after was the one that was going to get saved.
Yes.
And he chose to save his girlfriend.
You're right. He chose his girlfriend instead.
And I think that's what you're talking about, that delicious...
So if he had the trolley problem lever, he chose the one instead of the many in that situation.
Yes. And I think the twist is so delicious, not just because, like...
that you throw the lever and it goes the opposite way that you thought it was going to go.
Yeah, and so then that puts... What does that do to Bruce Wayne's psyche of knowing that, like, technically it all came out, like, a better way because it's better for everybody that it went this way.
But I chose the wrong one.
Yeah, but I chose the wrong one.
Yeah, that was good. And again, I like that Christopher Nolan didn't let the superhero rejection of the trolley problem affect the outcome. One of the people still died. It wasn't just the hero gets to save everyone because he's powerful.
Yeah,
it's much more interesting that characters have flaws and mistakes and they can't control every outcome than just that they can, always save everyone and get what they want.
Can I posit a very unpopular opinion real quick, Ben?
Go for it. So
I firmly believe that Batman is just emo Iron Man. Whatever you like about Batman, Tony Stark's just better. Like, go watch the Marvel movies instead.
I love in Iron Man 3 when Tony finally gets his suit and he's trapped in that mansion and he starts taking out the bad guys and he turns to the last one and points his blaster at him. The guy's like, man, I give up. These guys are weird. I don't even like working here anyway. And he throws down his gun and runs out. Not all the minions are just shocking indecisively.
That is a discussion. Put this on the agenda. We need to discuss the minions in movies like this, because there's only a handful of circumstances like that where a minion shows that he's a person with a brain.
Yeah, because on TV last night was that movie with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie called Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and there were just endless hordes of black masked guys with guns, and they just kept coming and coming and coming.
We talked about this on our bonus episode too. The HR department for any of these evil organizations, like, okay, so your uniform is going to be all black, head to toe, no name tag, black ski mask, and you're going to have automatic weapons, kill anybody that comes to that door. Any questions? And how they find all these people are like, nope, sounds good to me.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, all right, I'm queuing that one up. Okay, so I know we said we'd do 3 each, but I can't go without talking about Avengers, Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame.
I watched Infinity War just a couple of weeks ago because that movie is so good.
Oh, it is. And every time I watch it, I just enjoy it and appreciate it more. But let's go back to Infinity War. Because Infinity War, they're grappling with the vision problem. And that is, we know Thanos is coming. He's trying to gather all the stones. We have one of them here, and we have the power to destroy it. All we have to do is sacrifice one life, and we can save half of the known universe.
One robot. Let's get this clear. That thing is not alive. That's a robot.
That's debatable. I think they established pretty definitively that he is worthy of respect as a life, just like Data in Star Trek.
Okay, I'll give you that. I will give you that he is worthy of a Data level respect.
Okay, and he's going, I get it. Kill me. I see. Well, I'll kneel down right now. Take it. Go ahead and kill me.
Hang on a second.
He doesn't object in the least.
Yeah, he doesn't. He says, yeah, no, I need to be taken out. You guys need to take me out. However, I will say he doesn't take the step that he should have, and that is dragging Scarlet Witch off at the beginning of that movie and be like, you just need to take me out. They're all going to have problems with it. You need to kill me for the good of the universe right now.
She wasn't going to do it. She was not going to do it until faced with imminent destruction of the galaxy.
Yeah. And then, it was so... can we just gush about how awesome it was that they went through with it? She went through the horrible, emotional turmoil.
It was a brilliant stroke of filmmaking.
Yes, where she went through the whole internal destruction of her soul that is killing the person that she loves, and Thanos just undid it and made it all worthless.
They did that twice in one movie. They also had Peter Quill do it to
Gamora.
Face?
You're right. The same situation. Gamora. The person,
the same thing.
The whole internal struggle of rewriting your soul for no good reason.
Both Scarlet Witch and Peter Quill both had to kill the one they love in that movie.
And Thanos undid it like it was a joke. Oh, yeah, so good.
Yeah, it was diabolical. He got away with it better than the Joker ever could.
Hands down, best bad guy in all movies.
Okay, so that was Infinity War, and I think that was worthy of looking into. You know, it was the turn the trolley and kill one person and save the half the known universe. Let's dial all the math up to the maximum possible extent. Kill one person that you know and love, or save everyone.
Which then goes back to the superhero.
To save
which
everyone.
goes back to the superhero supervillain problem we were talking about earlier, where the morality code of the superheroes would not allow them to take any action whatsoever that could lead to even one death. They thought they could beat the problem, like you talk about in these other movies. Spider-Man saved everybody regardless. That's what they were shooting for, and they failed miserably. They failed to save Vision, and they failed to save half the universe.
Yeah. And then they made us cope with it. They ended the movie, and we sat there for a year stewing on the fact that everyone died.
Which, another reason that movie is fantastic, it is the Empire Strikes Back of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is such a masterpiece of expectations.
This glum, bleak ending.
Just everything about the movie is great.
Yeah, they even kill some of our favorite characters permanently, and some not so much.
We'll see. With the supervillain that, like, he talks and he's so eloquent and well spoken, and you're just kind of like, yeah, what he's saying makes sense in a horrible kind of ultra utilitarian way, but it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so then that brings us to Endgame. Now we have a completely different kind of iteration of the trolley problem where everybody's got the lever. You know, Hawkeye and Black Widow, Clint and Natalie are standing on top of the platform of eternities or whatever the heck it's called with floaty Red Skull guy. I love the way Clint sums it up later. Like, you take your hammer and fly up there and tell the floating Red Skull guy to make her come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're standing up there on the platform, and they recognize, just because the movie insists that this is the case, that you can't get the Soul Stone without sacrificing someone that you love.
Yes.
And while they've never actually established any kind of romantic relationship between Clint and Nat, they obviously care very deeply for each other, and I think that they were not cheating to feel that they've invested enough in the relationship between those two characters up to that point in the MCU that this was a very, very momentous moment.
Yeah, just like, all of the interactions. Like, we never talk about, like, them specifically. They never had their own spin-off movie on their own. But there is no doubt in anyone's mind in that theater that had seen the movies that these two have a very strong platonic love relationship.
Yes. And there's that great scene where Clint looks at Nat and he's like, well, I guess there's no way out of this. So, yeah, we're going to have to throw somebody off the cliff. And then he looks at her and he's like, I have a feeling we're not thinking about the same person.
And then we get this great fight scene between two master assassins over who's going to kill themselves faster.
Yeah, it was a great fight scene where they're actually fighting to not kill so they can commit suicide. There's never been anything like it in all of cinema, I think.
It was a very weird scene. Like, no, I think I should die. No, yeah, that was. And then you thought Hawkeye made it, and then he gets the rope around the arm and, like, the whole thing.
Yeah, and there was so much invested up to that point. I mean, we'd established that Hawkeye had a family that he loved and cared about, and that what they were doing could potentially bring them back. But then he had a lot of regret and remorse for what he'd done since they died, where he'd gone around basically being a, complete, utter, lawless, I don't know what to call
Vigilante.
And, she felt like maybe her mistakes in the past, or the fact that she had, as part of her training, had gotten sterilized, or for whatever reason, she didn't deserve to live as much as he did. And they both thought they should be the one to go.
Can I go on a tangent for a second? So,
sure.
As a grown man, I wept openly in the theater watching that movie several times.
Oh, yeah.
The first time was when the opening scene and where Clint's family gets dusted, like, around him. Like, oh, man.
Yeah.
Just like that set the tone for the whole movie. And then the second time is when they first did the snap and brought everybody back, and Clint's phone is ringing with his wife's name on it.
Yeah, his wife's there.
And, like, how many phones has he gone through, Ben? It's been 5 years. How many phones have you gone through?
He's still got her in his contacts.
And the picture. Like, he's still got her in there.
Yeah.
And, like, just open weeping. Just grown man.
Every bit of emotion that they pulled out of me in there was so well earned. And so, then when it finally happens, you feel just like Clint does when he goes back and tries to explain it to him. They're like, why didn't you save her? Why can't you bring her back? And he's like, this is the way it had to be.
It's like, hey, I have no control over this. I was in space talking to Red Skull on top of a giant building that makes no sense. Like, I don't know these rules. I'm a guy with a bow and arrow. Like, he said this in Avengers 2. We're fighting an army of robots on a flying city, and I've got a bow and arrow. None of this makes any sense.
Well, hundreds of years ago, when Immanuel Kant and David Bentham were coming up with their theories of utilitarianism and deontology, that never in their wildest imaginations could they have imagined that scenario.
But that's what makes the scenario so resounding, is because the concepts and the struggles of morality. Yeah, it might be an outlandish situation, but everybody struggles with those same decisions every day. How many times, like, have you ever been handed too much change? Has anybody ever handed you a $10 bill when they meant to hand you a $1 bill? And you had to have
Absolutely.
You had to have that ethical dilemma with yourself at that moment. I could walk away and no one will ever know the difference, or I got to hand this back to them. Like, just that kind of stuff happens to everyone all the time, which is why the stories about these decisions, obviously blown up to superhero proportions, but we can all understand the struggle with these kinds of things.
Yeah, and sometimes you could be choosing whether or not you're going to save like your unborn child or your wife of 10 years, or you could be deciding if you're just going to let a stranger cut in front of you in line.
So people ask me, like, when I was back when I was flying drones, because we did have weapons and we did kill people. And I was asked several times, like, do you feel bad? Like, do you have quandaries or dilemmas if somebody calls you to kill somebody? And every time my answer was always a resounding no. And it's because of that whole external authority kind of thing. There was so many people.
You're the experimental person being told to shock that person in the other room.
Right. And I recognize my role in this thing. Like, there are so many other people that have so much more situational awareness, information, intelligence, and decision-making authority than I do that are calling for this, that for me to second guess all of those people with the limited scope, like, there's no way. So I said all that just to say that I've been in situations where I've been called to kill people, and I have not faced a moral dilemma anywhere near what you had with your wife in the preeclampsia episode.
Wow. Yeah. I've often thought, even though I've never directly been involved in having to make a decision to take a life as a member of the United States military, about the way our system's set up. You know, we, the people of the United States of America, elect commander-in-chief who, you know, is the executive of our government, who sits at the head of our military. And he gives orders, basically policy by other means, that could potentially include the committing of violence on behalf of the people. And we, as the military members, are carrying out the orders of that whole chain. Basically, agents acting on behalf of the will of the popular vote of the people of the United States of America, committing violence against people in the world. And we as individuals retain our, I'll say, moral purity by adhering to the regulations. They've also given us extra regulations where we're supposed to give a little bit of a morality check on what we're being asked to do, so they don't have another Malay massacre like they did in Vietnam, or those kinds of things. But basically, as long as the orders I'm being given are lawful orders and I carry them out within the governance that I've been given, then I as an individual have not basically taken a life as an individual. I've done it almost as like a cog in a machine.
On behalf of my state.
Yes. And so I am therefore free from individual accountability. And I believe that from the very deepest level, as a deeply religious person, which is the moral space I live in as a member of the military. But I also believe that situations could come up where something could happen where it would be very much a personal decision that I would have to make. Not that it has, but yeah, like you said, the time you get handed too much change, or maybe saw a target of opportunity when you hadn't been given the order to fire.
Oh man, that's not a thing. That's not a thing, but we won't go into that discussion. Now, can I just say, as we it feels like we're wrapping up this conversation.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that this has been an epic episode of Bad and Magic. Like, we've talked about like U.S. politics, global warming, morality and ethics at the fundamental level. Marvel movies. I don't think we've talked about Star Wars, which is unfortunate. We'll have to come back to that. Video games, driverless cars. Like, this is it. This is the whole gambit. Like, we're at the peak of our game here. And everybody listening, you are privileged to have listened to such an epic episode of this podcast.
This is a podcast about games, life, and other things, and we definitely talked about all of those today.
Boy, howdy, did we check all those boxes.
Well, thank you to those of you who are listening to this episode of the podcast. Like Josh always says, if you like it, share it with someone that you think also might be interested. If you really like it, you can go to patreon.com/badatmagic and become one of our Patreon supporters and get access to exclusive content and show us a little bit of appreciation. Please, if you don't know, I spend a great deal of time trying to enrich your listening experience by creating a very media-rich environment on Facebook and Reddit. So if you go on our Facebook page, every time I release an episode, I also release a photo album that goes along with the episode that has graphics I've made, references, and those kinds of things that go along with the episode. And then you can go on Reddit if you want to join in on the discussion, give your opinion on things we've said.
Yeah, thanks to all of our listeners. We love making this content for you. We're going to continue doing it as long as possible.